Patton's Third Army had officially activated on August 1, 1944. In less than a month, it had driven hundreds of miles across France. Entire German formations had dissolved before its armored columns. Prisoners streamed west by the thousands. Now, as September unfolded, the front was no longer fluid. German forces were pulling back toward prepared defensive positions near the Moselle River and the Lorraine region. The Siegfried Line lay beyond. Higher command urged caution. Patton saw opportunity. Intelligence intercepts suggested confusion among retreating German units. Fuel shortages plagued the Wehrmacht as much as they did the Americans. Retreating divisions lacked coordination. Bridges were being blown in haste. Rear guards were thin. To Patton, the enemy was still off balance, and balance, once regained, would be costly to break again. His plan was simple in concept and dangerous in execution. Drive east fast enough to prevent organized German defense, exploit weak sectors, cross the Moselle before the enemy could fortify it, force a breach into the Corps-Saar region, Germany's industrial artery. He ordered his corps commanders forward. Major General Walton Walker's the 20th Corps pushed toward Metz. Major General Mantonetti's, the 12th Corps advanced toward Nancy. Armored divisions maneuvered aggressively, seeking crossings before German engineers could destroy them. But there was a problem. Fuel allocations were limited. Patton prioritized spearhead units, concentrating gasoline on armored columns while rear echelons waited. It was a calculated imbalance. The front tip would move. The tail would stretch. If the Germans counterattacked hard, that stretched tail could snap. By early September, Third Army reached the Moselle. The river was not wide, but it was a barrier. German forces had anticipated the crossing. Artillery was positioned to cover likely bridge sites. Infantry occupied high ground. Engineers prepared demolitions. Patton did not wait for ideal conditions. He ordered immediate crossings. On September 5th and 6th, American units attempted to force river passages under fire. Assault boats pushed across in darkness. Engineers scrambled to erect pontoon bridges. German artillery zeroed in on crossing points. Men were hit before reaching shore, but crossings were secured. Each successful bridgehead forced German commanders to shift reserves. Model, commanding Army Group B, faced a dilemma. Reinforce Metz or protect the Saar approaches, strengthen the north or stabilize the center. Patton's speed complicated German decisions, but speed without depth carries risk. As Third Army pressed east, weather shifted. Heavy rains turned fields into mud. Vehicles bogged down off-road. Supply trucks struggled. Roads became choked. Traffic jams formed behind advancing columns. German resistance stiffened around Metz. The city was surrounded by a ring of fortifications built in the late 19th century. Thick concrete, steel turrets, interlocking fields of fire. These were not makeshift defenses. They were engineered to withstand siege. Patton initially hoped to bypass Metz. But German forces anchored their defense there, turning the city into a pivot point. Artillery from the forts dominated approaches. Infantry assaults stalled. Armor could not easily penetrate reinforced positions. The rapid exploitation phase slowed, and the gamble deepened. To the north, near Nancy, the 12th Corps achieved a breakthrough. On September 12th, American forces seized key crossings south of the city, surprising German defenders who expected the main effort elsewhere. Patton shifted weights quickly, redirecting armor through the weak point. It was classic maneuver warfare. German units reeled backward. American tanks pushed toward the German border. Communications intercepts revealed confusion among opposing divisions. For a moment, it appeared Patton's instinct was correct. The enemy was still vulnerable. But the deeper Third Army advanced, the more exposed its flanks became. Units stretched thin across wide frontages. Infantry strength lagged behind armored spearheads. Replacement troops were inexperienced. Artillery ammunition stocks were declining. Bradley watched the reports closely. He understood the razors edged. If German armored reserves struck at a narrow penetration, American spearheads could be cut off west of the Moselle. Fuel shortages would then become fatal rather than inconvenient. Inside German headquarters, Field Marshal Model acted decisively. He transferred available panzer units into Lorraine. Defensive belts were reinforced behind rivers and ridge lines. Anti-tank guns were repositioned to cover likely American routes. Bridges were demolished systematically rather than in panic. The German army was no longer fleeing, it was organizing. The window for collapse was closing. Patton responded with aggression. He ordered simultaneous thrusts across multiple sectors, forcing the Germans to divide attention. Reconnaissance units probed constantly, seeking gaps. When a weak point appeared, armor surged through before artillery could adjust. But artillery ammunition was now rationed. Infantry assaults grew costly. Casualty reports rose steadily through late September. What had begun as a pursuit was becoming a campaign of attrition. In one critical moment, near our German panzer brigades attempted a counterattack against American positions in mid-September. Thick morning fog limited visibility. German Panther tanks advanced expecting surprise. Instead, American tank destroyers and Shermans, guided by superior radio coordination and artillery support, engaged at close range. Despite being technically outgunned, U.S. units maneuvered effectively. Air support, once weather cleared, hammered exposed German armor. The German counterattack collapsed. It was a sharp reminder. Patton's gamble had nearly been tested and survived, but survival was not the same as breakthrough. By early October, Third Army had advanced into Lorraine but had not shattered German defenses. Metz remained contested. The Saar lay beyond fortified lines. Fuel shortages persisted. Weather worsened. Patton had pushed harder than many expected possible under logistical strain. He had prevented a clean German regrouping in Lorraine, but he had not broken through to Germany's heart. Between brilliance and disaster had indeed been razor thin. Had German reserves been stronger at Aracourt, had supply lines failed completely, had bridges collapsed at critical moments, Third Army might have faced encirclement. Instead, it held dot, and in holding it preserved offensive pressure that would matter later. The broader strategic picture was shifting dot to the north. Operation Market Garden had failed to secure a Rhine crossing at Arnhem. In the Hirchen Forest, American divisions were bogged down in brutal, costly fighting. The broad front was advancing but slowly. Germany was not collapsing, it was bracing. Patton's defiance had bought time in one sense, denying the enemy full stabilization in Lorraine, but it had not delivered decisive victory. By November 1944, winter crept across the front. Snow dusted the Ardennes forest to the north, a sector considered quiet, lightly held by American units resting after previous operations. Third Army remained engaged in grinding assaults around Metz and the Saar. Then, in mid-December, German forces would strike through the Ardennes in a massive counter-offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. And when that attack came, it would be Patton, the same commander who refused to slow down, who would be asked to pivot his entire army north in one of the most daring operational maneuvers of the war. The gamble was not over. It was merely waiting for a new battlefield. December 1944. Snow fell across the Ardennes. American units along the line believed the sector was quiet. Intelligence reports suggested the Germans were exhausted, depleted, incapable of mounting a major offensive. The worst, many assumed, was behind them. Omar Bradley was not so certain. In the weeks since the September halt and the grinding battles through Lorraine, he had watched the war shift shape. Rapid pursuit had turned into methodical assault. Logistics had dictated tempo. Weather had tightened every margin. And more than once, he had asked himself a quiet question. Had they come dangerously close to overreaching? Bradley was not a reckless commander. He had built his reputation on steady control in North Africa, in Sicily, in Normandy. During Operation Cobra, he had overseen the breakout that shattered German lines in France. But breakout and exploitation were different from sustained penetration into enemy territory. Patton's Third Army had moved with extraordinary speed in August and early September. It had forced crossings, seized cities, disrupted German withdrawal routes. It had advanced to the Moselle while other formations reorganized, and at multiple points, it had been operating at the edge of its logistical tether. Fuel stocks dipped alarmingly low. Ammunition was rationed. Bridges were secured. Just hours before demolition, if even one major German counterattack had landed cleanly against a thinly supplied spearhead, the consequences might have been severe. Bradley understood that, because he had signed off on those movements. In private conversations after the campaign, Bradley admitted how narrow the margin had been. At Aricourt in September 1944, German panzer brigades struck into American positions during dense fog. Had their coordination been tighter, had American reconnaissance failed, Third Army's exposed elements might have been isolated. Instead, American radio coordination and artillery flexibility reversed the momentum, but it could have gone differently. In Lorraine, the terrain itself punished overconfidence. Rivers, ridgelines, and fortified cities like Metz slowed movement. Each crossing required engineering precision. Each delay lengthened supply lines. Bradley later reflected that a collapse of supply, not enemy strength, had been the greatest vulnerability. If gasoline convoys had faltered completely, armored divisions would have become stationary targets, and stationary armor is dead armor. Yet the disaster never came. German resistance stiffened, but it did not shatter the American advance. Field Marshal Walter Model stabilized sectors, but he lacked the fuel and reserves for sustained offensive action. In September and October, the Wehrmacht was fighting defensively, and under pressure, that pressure mattered. While Allied forces consolidated, repaired ports, and cleared the Scheldt to open Antwerp, German divisions were forced to commit to continuous defensive operations along a wide front. They could not fully disengage to rebuild in depth. Patton's refusal to ease entirely, his constant probing, his repeated assaults denied the Germans operational breathing room in Lorraine. Bradley came to see that clearly. The balance between genius and disaster often reveals itself only in hindsight. From the command map, the risks were obvious. The Third Army's axis of advance bent eastward toward the Saar. To its north lay sectors still stabilizing after Market Gardens failure. To its south, mountainous terrain restricted maneuver. Supply routes ran hundreds of miles back to Normandy. Beaches not yet fully replaced by Antwerp's capacity. Had Germany concentrated armor in Lorraine, instead of planning for a winter counteroffensive in the Ardennes, Patton might have faced coordinated assault against thin supply corridors. But Hitler chose differently. He diverted resources toward planning what would become the Battle of the Bulge. In doing so, he committed to a gamble of his own. Bradley's reflections after the war were measured. He did not romanticize risk. He did not dismiss logistics. He understood that operational brilliance collapses without supply discipline. But he also recognized something else. Momentum exerts psychological force. His rapid American advance across France in August and September 1944 did more than capture territory. It shattered the aura of German invincibility in the West. French cities fell in sequence. German prisoners marched west by the tens of thousands. The perception of unstoppable Allied pressure forced German command into reactive posture, and reactive posture limits initiative. Bradley would later admit that Patton's aggression, while alarming at moments, accelerated the erosion of German defensive cohesion. The Wehrmacht never fully regained the strategic initiative in the West after September 1944. Even the Ardennes offensive, though initially successful, was a desperate attempt to reverse a tide already moving against Germany. When the Battle of the Bulge erupted on December 16, 1944, Bradley's concerns about overextension resurfaced in a different form. German forces achieved surprise. American lines bent sharply. Entire regiments were overwhelmed in the opening hours. But this time, the Allies possessed something they had lacked in early September. Depth supply depots were more secure. Antwerp was operational. Troop concentrations were denser. Communications were stronger. And Patton, the same commander once accused of pushing too far, executed a rapid pivot north with Third Army to relieve Bastone's army, already positioned aggressively in Lorraine, was able to turn and strike the German southern flank of the Bulge within days. Had Third Army been held further back in September, that maneuver would have taken longer. Time mattered. It always mattered. Bradley understood. The irony, the very aggressiveness that once threatened overextension now provided flexibility. The line between recklessness and foresight had blurred. In war, outcomes define judgment. Had Patton's advance collapsed in September, history might have labeled it hubris. Had German counterattack severed supply lines, the narrative would have shifted toward unnecessary risk. But the collapse never came. German resistance, though fierce, deteriorated steadily through late 1944. Allied forces crossed the Rhine and ultimately entered the heart of Germany in early 1945. The Western Front did not fracture. It tightened in later interviews and memoirs. Bradley spoke of Patton with a mix of caution and respect. He acknowledged the tension. He acknowledged the anxiety. He acknowledged that command decisions in September 1944 carried enormous uncertainty, but he also conceded that boldness, when paired with operational skill, can produce results that caution alone cannot. The collapse of German defenses in the West was not instantaneous. It was cumulative, and cumulative pressure requires relentless application. Patton had applied it. Bradley had managed its limits. Eisenhower had balanced competing visions together. They navigated a narrow corridor between opportunity and catastrophe. History rarely announces its verdict in the moment. In September 1944, the Allied halt order appeared prudent. Patton's continued pressure appeared dangerous. German resistance appeared fragile but not broken. Each commander operated within incomplete information, constrained by fuel, weather, terrain, and political necessity. The difference between disaster and genius was measured not in speeches, but in miles gained, bridges secured, and counterattacks repelled. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the campaign across France and into the Reich was viewed as a sustained success. The Western Allies had advanced from Normandy to the Rhine in less than a year. The German army in the West was destroyed. Looking back, Bradley recognized that the war in autumn 1944 had hung in delicate balance, but balance is not paralysis. It is tension under control. Patton's gamble did not break the Allied line. It bent it forward, and in that forward bend lay the acceleration of Germany's collapse. War does not reward caution alone, nor does it reward recklessness. In September 1944, along the rivers of Lorraine and the roads beyond Paris, the outcome rested. Between those two extremes, history chose its verdict, and the verdict was advance.